Your sister cannot carry a child, so you are going to do it for her. You give Kayla the baby. She gets the $1,200,000, and you go back to your little life. You are just the vessel, Madison. My mother did not even blink. She slid the legal waiver across the glass table. Looking at my 6-month pregnant belly with zero affection and 100% calculation, she was not asking for a favor. She was ordering me to sign over my unborn daughter so my sister could unlock our grandfather's inheritance. Before I tell you how I dismantled their world, drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I want to see how far this story travels. No, the word was quiet, but in the sterile, air-conditioned silence of my parents' Savannah sunroom, it sounded like a structural beam snapping. My mother, Michelle, didn't move at first. She just stared at me, her eyes tracking the movement of my lips, as if she were trying to compute a mathematical error. She wasn't a mother hearing a daughter's refusal. She was a chief executive officer, watching a junior employee sabotage a multi-million-dollar merger. The mask slipped then. Michelle didn't argue. She didn't try to persuade me with talk of family or sisterly love. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. It was the fury of a creditor being denied a guaranteed payment. She lunged across the glass table. "It belongs to her," she screamed. Her hand slammed into my shoulders with a force that had 26 years of resentment behind it. "You selfish little mistake. The baby belongs to Kayla." I stumbled backward. My heel caught the edge of an antique Persian rug, the kind of expensive detail my mother used to hide the rot in our family foundations. Suddenly, the glass table and the scent of expensive lilies were gone. They were replaced by empty air and the hard wooden steps leading down to the garden. Gravity took over. In that split second of weightlessness, my brain did not panic. It switched gears. I am a forensic architect. I spend my days analyzing how buildings collapse, looking for the exact moment where stress exceeds capacity. Panic is a luxury for those who do not understand physics. As the world tilted, I didn't reach out to break my fall. I knew that a broken wrist wouldn't save the life inside me. I tucked my chin. I curled my body inward, wrapping my arms tight around my midsection, transforming myself into a human shield for the life growing inside me. I hit the first step with my shoulder, then my hip, then felt the sickening jolt of wood against my ribs. I rolled, letting the momentum carry me, until I landed on the manicured grass. I lay there for a heartbeat, the breath knocked out of my lungs, staring up at the sunroom deck. My mother stood at the top, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. She wasn't horrified. She wasn't rushing down to help. She was just waiting. She was watching to see if the structural problem had been liquidated. My training kicked in. Airway patent, breathing shallow, sharp, localized pain in the left lateral chest wall, likely a rib fracture. I ignored the fire in my side and focused on the only metric that mattered. I waited, holding my own breath, until my lungs burned. Then, a flutter. A tiny protesting kick against my palm, fetal movement detected. She was still there. I didn't scream. I didn't cry for help. Crying is for victims. And in this house, victims are finished off. I pulled myself up, every muscle in my torso screaming in protest. I didn't look back at the house. I walked straight to my car, pulled out my phone, and opened my camera. I photographed the scuff mark on the wooden stairs. I photographed the angle of the sunroom door. I captured the exact coordinates of my collapse. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My father, Stephen, was standing by the sliding glass door, watching me through the screen. He didn't move. He didn't offer a hand. He just stood there with a blank face, like a man observing a transaction that had gone slightly wrong but could still be salvaged. My hand was steady as I started the ignition. I didn't head for the hospital. I headed for my office. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I had been the load-bearing pillar for this family for years, but now I was ready to initiate a controlled demolition. Before I even reached the end of the driveway, I was already clicking through my phone. I changed the administrative passwords to the family's estate management portal, the one I had set up and personally funded. I revoked the family group access to my streaming accounts and my high-speed data plan. I wasn't crying, I was accounting. And by the time I hit the main road, The Davis family was already beginning to lose their structural integrity. For the past decade, I hadn't been a daughter in that house. I had been a silent investor in their version of family. In my line of work, we look for the load-bearing pillars, the parts of a structure that carry all the weight while remaining invisible behind the drywall. That was me. I was the load-bearing daughter. As a senior lead architect at a top-tier firm, I was the only one in the family with a high six-figure income and a functional credit score. I wasn't just paying bills, I was subsidizing a lifestyle they could no longer afford. When Kayla's high-end boutique failed 3 years ago, draining $45,000 of the family's savings, it was my overtime at the firm that quietly backfilled their accounts. When my father, Stephen, overextended his credit at the country club to maintain his image of Savannah prestige, I was the one who paid the property taxes on the mansion to keep the bank from knocking. I didn't do it because I was weak. I did it because I was an architect. I saw the cracks in the foundation, and I thought if I just provided enough structural support, the house wouldn't collapse on all of us. But in that Savannah sunroom, looking at the cold calculation in my mother's eyes, I realized that my compassion had been a luxury they had overdrawn for years. I remembered a summer evening when I was 12. I had been hiding in the library when I heard Michelle tell a friend that I was a happy accident, a structural error she had to live with, while Kayla was her planned perfection. I had spent 26 years trying to apologize for being an unplanned addition to her life. This is the trap of normalizing cruelty. When you grow up in a house where your pain is treated as a technical glitch in someone else's perfect narrative, you start to believe that endurance is a virtue. I had convinced myself that managing my mother's narcissism was just like managing a chronic structural leak. You don't get angry at the water for leaking, you just put a bucket under it. I had become a master at placing buckets. I thought that by absorbing the pressure, I was keeping the family whole. But as the throbbing in my ribs synchronized with the heartbeat of the life inside me, the diagnosis changed. Michelle and Stephen didn't want a daughter. They wanted an asset they could liquidate to pay for their failures. They saw my unborn child not as a grandchild, but as a $1,200,000 payout to fix the mess they had made. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single tear of regret, but there was only a clinical, icy clarity. This wasn't a family breakdown. It was a forensic audit. My compassion was a resource. And as of today, the Davis family was officially bankrupt. The silence of my drive home didn't last. My phone started vibrating against my thigh, a relentless, buzzing insect. I didn't answer. I knew the playbook. At 7:42 in the evening, the first structural tremor hit my inbox. Michelle had sent a family-wide email to every aunt, uncle, and cousin from Savannah to Atlanta. The subject line was prayers for Madison. It was a masterpiece of performance art. She wrote about my precious but fragile state and my growing hormonal instability. She claimed I had suffered a dizzy spell and an unfortunate trip down the garden stairs. She even mentioned that she and Stephen were heartbroken that I was refusing to let them help me through this mental crisis. This was the gaslighting phase, the attempt to rewrite history before the ink on my medical records was even dry. She wasn't worried about my broken ribs. She was building a foundation for the next stage of her takeover. If she could paint me as unstable, my refusal to sign the waiver would look like a symptom of a breakdown rather than a rational choice to protect my child. Then came the text from my father, Stephen. It was transactional, as always. He didn't ask if I was still in pain. He didn't ask if the baby was moving. He wrote, Madison, pick up. Your mother is hysterical. We can pay for the medical bills. Just come back to the house. Don't make a scene. Think about the family name. If you continue to alienate us, we will have no choice but to pursue grandparental rights legally to ensure that child is raised in a stable environment. Grandparental rights. They were threatening to weaponize the legal system to steal my daughter before she had even taken her first breath. They were trying to use my career in forensic architecture, the late nights and site visits, to paint me as an absentee parent. I didn't reply to the accusations. I didn't send a picture of the deep purple bruising blooming across my torso. I didn't scream that they were liars. I decided to become a gray rock. It is a technique I use when dealing with unstable structures or unstable people. You don't argue. You don't defend. You don't explain. You become as uninteresting and impenetrable as a stone. You give them nothing to feed on, no emotion to twist. I let them project their lies onto my silence. I let them feel powerful. I let them think I was the broken daughter hiding in a corner, waiting to fold. I sat in the dark of my own living room, my laptop glowing with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I wasn't hiding. I was sharpening the tools for a surgical removal. I didn't call the family lawyer. Hiring him would have been like asking an arsonist to conduct a fire safety inspection. Instead, I called a firm that specialized in estate litigation, someone who didn't care about the Savannah Social Registry or the Davis family name. I walked into their office the next morning, my ace bandage tight around my ribs, and my forensic financial model built with the same analytical precision I use for structural load testing loaded on my tablet. This wasn't a consultation. It was a briefing for a demolition. I need a full structural inspection of the grandfather's legacy trust, I told the attorney. I didn't mention the fall on the stairs or the gaslighting emails. I kept my voice as cold and level as a concrete slab. There is a $1,200,000 balance that is supposed to be sitting there. I suspect the foundation is leaking. My attorney, a sharp woman who looked like she'd never had a sentimental thought in her life, started the paperwork for an emergency forensic audit. While she handled the legal filings, I went to work on the data. I spent the next 3 days doing what I do best, looking for the failure points. I treated the family's financial history like a set of blueprints for a building that was already collapsing. I applied my structural analysis logic to cross-reference their alleged maintenance costs with real market construction data. I didn't see a family ledger. I saw an invoice fraud scheme. I didn't see a family ledger. I saw a structure that had been hollowed out from the inside. They were living in a house of cards, supported by air, and the desperate hope that I would hand over my daughter to keep the walls from caving in. The preliminary audit results came back at 2:15 in the afternoon on a Thursday. It wasn't just a spreadsheet, it was an autopsy. The legacy trust, the $1,200,000 that was supposed to be the family's salvation, was being siphoned. I found emergency withdrawals totaling $300,000 over the last 18 months. Every time Stephen went to the country club, every time Michelle bought a new designer pantsuit, they were taking a sledgehammer to the trust. They weren't just greedy, they were desperate. They were trying to backfill a massive debt with money that legally belonged to the next generation. My sister Kayla's boutique hadn't just failed. It had been a black hole that swallowed every cent they could illegally withdraw. The most damning piece of evidence was a signature on a $300,000 loan against the trust's equity. It was my grandfather's name, dated 2 months ago. My grandfather has been dead for 5 years. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. They hadn't just pushed me. They had been planning this theft for years. They thought I was too quiet to notice the missing numbers, too compliant to question the signatures. They thought I would just be the vessel that carried the solution to their criminal liabilities. But a forensic architect knows that you cannot build a future on a rotten foundation. I didn't call my father to demand an explanation. I didn't send an angry text to my mother. I simply hit export on the final report and sent a copy to the district attorney's office. The Davis family was about to find out that when you try to demolish a load-bearing pillar, the whole roof comes down on your head. The $300,000 forgery was the first crack, but it wasn't the final collapse. I spent the evening in my home office comparing the loan documents to a box of old birthday cards my grandfather had sent me. As a forensic architect, I look for inconsistencies in pressure and stroke patterns that indicate a lack of structural integrity. My grandfather's handwriting had been as precise as a draftsman's pencil. The signature on the loan was a hollow imitation, a facade built on a foundation of desperation. Then, my phone rang. It was an unknown number from a coastal area code. I usually didn't answer, but the timing felt like a structural alignment. Madison? The voice was raspy, like old parchment being unfolded. This is your Aunt Catherine. I imagine Michelle told you I was long gone. I went cold. Aunt Catherine, my grandfather's younger sister, had been a ghost in our family ledger for 10 years. Michelle had always said she was erased because of a mental breakdown, but now I realized the diagnosis was likely the same as mine. She was a liability to my mother's ego. We met at a quiet park near the marsh. Catherine didn't look like a ghost. She looked like a woman who had survived a demolition and spent a decade rebuilding her own sanctuary. She handed me a heavy, yellowed envelope that smelled of salt air and history. "This is the original will," she said. "The one my brother gave me to keep safe before Michelle and Stephen could put their hands on it. They are living on a forged copy, Madison." I opened the document, my hands steady even as the world around me shifted. It was all there. The Legacy Trust $1,200,000 was never meant to be a trade for a child. The bloodline clause wasn't a trap for me. It was a safeguard. The will explicitly stated that the trust was for the welfare of the direct descendants and was to be administered solely by Madison upon the grandfather's passing. But it was the final page that delivered the kill shot. There was a specific disinheritance clause written in my grandfather's precise, unwavering hand. It said, "Any heir or trustee who attempts to coerce, threaten, or manipulate an heir into surrendering their rights or assets shall be immediately and irrevocably disinherited. Their portion shall be liquidated and added to the principal for the protection of the remaining heirs." Michelle and Stephen hadn't just tried to steal my child, they had triggered a self-destruct mechanism in their own inheritance the moment they pushed me down those stairs. They were fighting for a fortune that, according to the original law of our house, they had already forfeited. "They think they're walking into a closing tomorrow," Catherine whispered. I looked at the original will, then at the forgery evidence on my tablet. "They're not walking into a closing," I said, the cold clarity finally solidifying into a plan. "They're walking into a demolition." The final meeting was held at the Savannah Manor, under the weight of humid air and 3 generations of secrets. Michelle was wearing a new pearls and silk ensemble, looking every bit the matriarch of a dynasty that was actually bleeding to death. She had a bottle of expensive champagne chilling on the side table, ready to celebrate the closing of her daughter's life. "You look like you've finally seen reason, Madison," she said, her voice smooth and lethal. She didn't even look at the ace bandage still wrapped around my torso. She just tapped the legal waiver on the desk. "Sign it, and we can put this unpleasantness behind us. We've already cleared a room in the West Wing for the nursery." Kayla is so excited. I sat there, a perfect gray rock. No anger, no tears, just a clinical observation of a dying structure. I didn't sign. Instead, I pulled my tablet from my bag and slid it across the mahogany surface. "That's the audit from the district attorney's office," I said. My voice was as level as a blueprint. "It details the $300,000 you siphoned from the trust. It also includes the forensic analysis of the loan documents, the ones with the forged signature of a dead man." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that happens right before building pancakes. Stephen's face went from pale to a sickly, mottled gray. Michelle didn't flinch, but her grip on her wine glass tightened until her knuckles were white. "You're bluffing," Stephen whispered, his voice cracking. "We have grandparental rights. We have standing in this community. You have a rented shell," I corrected him. This was the illusion of power in an empty wallet. For years, I had watched them perform wealth while I quietly fixed the leaks. They thought their status was a permanent foundation, but it was just a facade they had leased with stolen money. They weren't shocked by the crime. They were shocked that the vessel had stopped providing the capital to maintain the lie. Without that $1,200,000 trust, Michelle was just a woman in an expensive suit she couldn't afford, standing in a house she no longer owned. The heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open. Aunt Catherine walked in, clutching the original, salt-stained will. Michelle stood up, her mouth opening and closing like a structural joint failing under pressure. "Catherine?" she gasped. "You're supposed to be—" "I'm the witness to the truth you tried to bury, Michelle," Catherine said. She laid the document next to the forged waiver. The finisher came from the most unlikely place. Kayla, the golden child, suddenly backed away from the table. She looked at the police officers I had waiting in the hallway, then at the evidence of the forgery. She didn't hesitate. She didn't try to protect the mother who had worshipped her. "I didn't know about the forgery," Kayla shrieked, her voice high and desperate. "She made me do it, Madison. Mom said we had to get the baby or we'd lose the house. She's the one who pushed you. I saw her." Michelle froze, staring at the daughter she had sacrificed my life for, now offering her up to the authorities for a chance at immunity. It was the ultimate structural failure. The planned perfection had collapsed, and she was taking the whole house down with her. I stood up, ignoring the flare of pain in my ribs. I didn't feel a single ounce of regret. I felt like an architect who had finally cleared a condemned site. You have 24 hours to vacate this property, Michelle, I said. The original will disinherits anyone who coerces an heir. You're not just broke, you're evicted. The criminal complaint for attempted feticide and trust fraud has already been filed. I walked toward the door, leaving them in the ruins of their own greed. I didn't look back. I was done with the demolition. It was time to start building something with sunlight. 6 months after the dust settled on the ruins of my old life, I finally moved into a space that wasn't built on secrets or social standing. The cottage I designed for myself is situated on the edge of the woods, far away from the stifling humidity and heavy shadows of the Savannah Manor. It is a simple structure of glass and raw wood, where every window is positioned to capture the morning sun. There are no mahogany tables here, no heavy floral scents meant to hide the rot, just light. My daughter, little Catherine, named for the woman who saved us, is sleeping in her nursery. When she kicks now, it isn't a protest against a fall, but a joyous greeting to the day. For years, I was told I was just a vessel, a structural mistake to be managed. But when I look at her, I don't see an asset or a payout. I see a foundation that will never be built on lies. The legal fallout was as total as the structural collapse I engineered. The Savannah mansion was sold 3 weeks ago to fulfill the restitution order for the $1,200,000 siphoned from the trust. Michelle and Stephen are living in a small rental on the outskirts of town, their prestigious social life having evaporated the moment the bank accounts hit zero. Kayla, in a final act of self-preservation, testified against them and moved to the West Coast to start over, though she did it without a cent of the inheritance she worshipped. This is for those of you who have spent your lives being the load-bearing pillar for people who only notice you when they want to tear you down. I used to think my endurance was a virtue. I thought that by absorbing the pressure of their cruelty, I was proving my worth. But I have learned that you cannot fix a foundation that was designed to fail. We are told that family is an unbreakable contract, a debt of blood we can never repay. But you don't owe your soul to people who treat you like a resource to be exploited. Reclaiming your life isn't just about revenge. It's about revolution, the quiet kind that happens when you stop asking for permission to exist and start granting it to yourself. You are the architect of your own peace. You are allowed to walk away from a condemned house and build something new in the sunlight. I deleted Michelle's number from my phone this morning. It wasn't an act of anger. It was a final clearing of the site. Peace was the most expensive thing I've ever owned, and it was worth every cent. If you've ever had to cut off a toxic family to save your future, type peace in the comments. Let's show the world it's okay to choose yourself.